but he couldn't really generate faith. So he asked Geshe-la, how can I deal with this? How can I deal with this issue? So for example, there was no faith in past and future lives. So Geshe-la suggested what you should do is to just write it down, whatever kind of reason you have for why there's no past life. So why there's no continuation of the consciousness. So ask yourself why. So what is your reason for why it's not there? And then if it were to exist, well, why? Look at it from all sides, write it down again and again. The reasons for why there could be past and future lives, the reason for why they're not, and kind of go back and forth and really kind of debate in such a way, go back and forth, taking both kind of positions. So this is really helpful, and Geshe-la said this person was benefited by that to such a degree that he said he also took that technique and he applied it when he worked. So for his ordinary kind of work, he applied that. So any kind of plan he had, he then applied this idea, kind of going back and forth and investigating in such a way. 靠着自己思维让自己进步这样一个结果，这样，就对方得到回馈呢是真的有帮助，而且呢不仅是在思维佛法上有帮助，连对工作上也很有帮助这样子。他说，因为在工作的时候，有时候我们会希望写一些工作计划，所以他就会先把这些想法写在纸上，然后之后呢再站到这个纸的对方，看他说，我提出了这个工作计划怎么样？他说呢这种做法对他有帮助，所以老师说他提出来希望你能够对某些同学产生一些帮助。
今天他甚至你不的。 아니 그래서는 다 하게 shum나로네 또발라 라레고 송바 인장 아니 또베 다시디 아니 또비 왕기 아니 유버쳐봐 유버송아 아니 딘지질라 아니 또베 다비기 시고레스 뒤에 송당디야 아니 율용원에 다시군에 계주지 쳐 쳐바딜라 아니 민직다 디니 쳐기 왕기 아니 그 유버쳐도레스 어딜라 거다.
So then the second position that Geshe-la presents in his text here is the position that phenomena being merely imputed by conceptual consciousness means that they do depend on conceptual consciousness, they do depend on conceptual consciousness, but not only that, there also needs to be a basis of imputation from its own side. So from the side of the object, there needs to be the basis of imputation from its own side, plus the conceptual consciousness. So those in combination, something to exist, you need those two, a truly existent basis of imputation and a conceptual consciousness.
他第背下来的给个了下来，他第大当然用的背现在就下来我说了我那去了，他第个给那当银子给个了穿那不要了，第给个的下来，就是第几你给个他落实了，他给个结果老主要了，给个现在听不了他，第几在呢，看了我嘞，然后给个了土地制作结果嘞，安古些结果嘞。 아니 기계가 찾아이나 아니 괜투디 남중이 나와도 키지 남산 딱 기계다 진심마대나 디지조제의 리그미도 아니 기파 다공의 서비스 민다찬의 수수기 기계다 아니 다와가시에 조차도 코통하다 그런 거는 막 기계 인다스는 카자기 서비스 직천은 남산 기계 신바이 촬영이지 파다 먹어야지 그런 거는 수 촬영이지 다양 기계 큐르차네 산이나니도 토인데 셰시지듯이 거를 투고도 대학생이 기계 말이 사살 따고 있어요. 제사 어디 랑원을 주고 능수디 디인서레스 어디라고요. 디지도 전에 아니 디 기계신이 술을 라라라 기계 작습니다. 그 기주지 처고도 아니 기주 차선 창여가 있나요? 다 캠보이나 자 담아고 쇼도 있나 자 지금 막고 봐도 아니 기계 작업니다. 기주들은 자유네. 재산 기주 용이 미몽부 유비 능로네. 아니 지금 그 안티 기계 차를 재산 다시 기주 처바다 딜라 민다와 니 처왕기 엔 기계 차를 했어. 그래서 최탐지 된들이 했으니 다 딜라기였다.
So here in general, use the example that in general you need actually a conceptual consciousness, and you need in general a basis of imputation. So here the example, I'm not sure this is a good example, because when I wrote this was a very good example for me. It gave the example of a monastic disciplinarian, a Gekko. So we probably need to use kind of a modern day kind of examples here. But anyway, using the example of the disciplinarian, the example he describes here is that of appointing a new disciplinarian. So a disciplinarian is a person one has respect towards. One is respectful towards whenever you meet that person. So when, for example, you have a disciplinarian here, so when initially the person is appointed, so usually the way it's done is either the abbot appoints the disciplinarian, or the disciplinarian is elected by the monk body. But whichever it is, so when he's newly elected, when he's newly appointed, you have to remind yourself, oh, this is the Gekko, this is the disciplinarian. In order to be respectful, you need to remind yourself, oh, this is a new one, because you may not be respectful towards that person, being used to this person not being the disciplinarian. But after some time, when you're really used to it, when you're really used to the idea that this is the disciplinarian, it seems as if this person is the disciplinarian from his own side, almost like proclaiming, I am the disciplinarian, without actually saying that, but it seems to be coming from his own side that he's the disciplinarian. And so this, after some months, this is what happens, how it appears that this person from his own side is the disciplinarian. But then afterwards, when his term as disciplinarian is over, then you still have this kind of weird, this sense that there's a disciplinarian. So then you have to remind yourself, he is no longer the disciplinarian. So this kind of respect or the kind of reaction towards the disciplinarian, you need to get rid of that now, because this person is no longer the disciplinarian. But there's still that strong sense from his own side he's the disciplinarian, and therefore you need to remind yourself that he's no longer the disciplinarian. So that gives a sense of how there's a sense there's something from the side of the object being that, and not just being appointed or being designated as the disciplinarian by, for example, the abbot. So Geshe-la is saying that this illustrates that, of course, there's a basis of imputation. There's certain qualifications that this monk has, but so this is the basis of imputation that needs to be there, because you do not impute, you do not designate someone or appoint him as the disciplinarian without this basis of imputation. But you do need the imputation at the same time. So it's a combination of those two, a basis of imputation that fulfills certain qualifications, and then the appointment or the imputation.
Di umazinda indurwa di tiye di kadu diwa inseyu tanda shabu chijiri muchi kirkiri didi losari nima nga yue lar gongsen nima chubwe tola anta gongsen yuji mare sidi kashi kirin bor tsegirwa gongsen tsegi dosa ane chigi lagi do masi gigui lagi shagi chigi kusho duzugi kirin bor tsegi dosa chena ta gongsen nima chuyo imare ten kamwaching nanglo laga su mishi kirin bor tsegir da tine gigui koreade ra koreade kode dosi ane chigla di chiga da di chigdi pe ya pa di chiga da di chigdi sha didi ngi di kirin bor ne chong ne chayari da shiga ane gigui chitoyo mare ganza ane shugla roba dosa tudi kya nega zingmari shizi chigchedagi di pe koyade di shukite
So, when Geshe-la, so he gave this example, probably when Geshe-la was studying the Madhyamika, when he was in the Madhyamika class. Why? Because there was an incident that he remembered when Shabu-Chuji Rinpoche was the Gekko. So at that time, when Rinpoche was the Gekko or the disciplinarian, it was said that they had a vacation, they had a holiday for 5 days, 4 or 5 days. But they were not sure about the 6th day. So then they assumed it was still, it was the sixth day because they saw some people playing around near the room of the disciplinarian. So he was also playing green board. Carom. He was playing carom. So he was playing carom with his friends on like the carom board. And the disciplinarian, he came around to look for what was going on, and as it turned out, there was no vacation. So now he came to catch the monks who were breaking the rules. And so his friends, one side, one person went this way, one person went that way to escape from the disciplinarian. And Geshe-la jumped over the board and so ran away. And so he was already sick at that time. So later on, the disciplinarian came up to him and said, "You are a fake sick person. You jumped over this board. You're a fake sick person." So remembering this, remembering the incidents, remembering that situation, it stuck very strongly in him, that kind of fear and respect of the disciplinarian. And that's probably why he used this example.
다 디나신치기 에네 캄보디아연도 가시다 민당문인의 체시팅이 디rum하인 땡케치니 디요라 가시 체시팅이 매바다 캄보 뉘바 딘디나 다보티 테마케버체다 아니 다띵은 저기 베지샤서 인다스 추방인다스 디니에서 인다스 다사비체라 다디니에서 차도르 디 추방 차도르 다 디에야 강주문주 리미도 지선 다시 키주지 초 디강라 안다 디니 소망게 인주버레스.
So for example, another example would be if you build a house, for example, so that has 3 rooms, 3 kind of similar rooms. So, or you buy a house, never mind. So then, on the basis of that, you then eventually decide that this is going to be the kitchen, this is going to be the altar room, this is going to be the bedroom. So therefore, it's like initially you didn't make that decision; it wasn't clear. But then you decide that these are the different rooms. This is going to be what this room will be. So again, here you have a basis of interpretation, and you have a conceptual mind that now designates it or that computes it as being the kitchen, etc. So in that same way as explained before, you need this combination of a basis of imputation plus a conceptual consciousness that designates or imputes.
딜레디 아니면 줄로를 차려온뒤 다시 초보 코난기 토네 아니 기괴의 카메라스는 코난기 토네 있는 차려고도 왔어. 디처주디 같이 남주다 디진부니 같이 진주디레스.
So, but to us, the way it appears, so having explained that, the way it appears to our own mind, it seems that these phenomena that are just imputed seem to exist from the side of the basis of imputation. So the object of negation, in that sense, in that case, when it seems to be that from the side of the object, of the basis of imputation, this is an act of kitchen, etc. So that is the way in which the object of negation appears.
딜레디 와딜 랑원이 좀나 다시 초보다 되미고 버스 랑랑기 문에 추주고시 거래래지도 타타들도 왔다는 지디 저가라마들 딜레디 내미지 잡아서로 랑원이 좀나 다시 초보다 민다바도 되미고 이 초도 되는 주기지 시에가 이 초도 되미고 받지 안 주고시 거래 된지마 힘받지네 아니 다시 초보래 되기도 민다발에 되기도 최상한 라문에 맞춰버렸어. 민다발에 맞되나 아니 길그시니 마다고는 길그차루로. 다시 초발에 맞되나 아니 미술 강중중라 기회를 납제 상물로라 기회차루로. 제선다 기회차바다 아니 다바다 다시 초번이 초지고도 왔어. 디니의 되는 주가 인상 라문에 주 요마레스. 이렇게 되래.
So here there's one sentence in Geshe-la's writing where he says, if something exists from its own side inherently, then it does not depend on the basis of imputation or the collection of the basis of imputation. So actually Geshe-la is saying I should revise that sentence, I should change the sentence by saying, if something does exist from its own side, when it exists, or if it exists inherently, it does neither depend on the collection of the basis of imputation or on the basis of imputation, nor on a name, nor on a giving a name. So because phenomena exist in dependence on both, because phenomena do not exist inherently, so taking the opposite, since they do not exist inherently, how do they exist? They depend on the basis of imputation, plus they depend on designation by conceptual consciousness. If conceptual consciousness was not necessary, well then in the example of the disciplinarian would absurdly be a disciplinarian even before appointing him as a disciplinarian. So you need someone appointing, you need a conceptual consciousness designating him. If there were no basis of imputation necessary, if that was not necessary, then even any ordinary person who is not qualified to be the disciplinarian would absurdly become the disciplinarian. So therefore you need both. You need a conceptual consciousness designating or imputing, and you need a basis of imputation, a qualified basis of imputation.
That the injured the pen Kishita Gishevina, when I have been singing to Vilavina, that Kishi loves in the Yalamero. Now, Maralo Charters Kishiki Koran Pakipeja Tachi, any Shin Jura. Shin did say lonely. And teacher that's a water chenny, and Tevotane and Koki Charota. Zevo Machibi, Nimakashingula, she the Ranjayurta, Zevocheva the Lubu to Shin children in the Yomar, a Subula, Guromisi te, send the Guromisi te, pay Yomarta, Zevocheva Zamrata. Ready Chipuchikan in, Shin Chipuchikan ready, and Zevoche said Kishiri, Zevo Machiko Kishimari. Chesako Tashimun Kijis Tama that killed to us. So another
example is, for example, someone becoming a geshe, so the academic degree of geshe, when someone gets that title geshe, or Vishla says, or someone becomes a president, he's saying, I continue with the example of geshe because it's easier for me. So here, someone gets the degree of geshe if they have certain qualifications. So the qualifications that are needed are there, but they only become a geshe when there's a certain celebration. There's a kind of a celebration that takes place. So without that celebration, you do not call them geshe. But the qualities are the same. So before engaging in that celebration, or before that celebration takes place, the qualifications are there. And not that the qualifications get stronger, that suddenly he knows more. Even the body stays similar. It's not like a totally different body. But nonetheless, even though the qualifications, that which qualifies him potentially to be a geshe, unless there is a geshe celebration, unless that has taken place, you wouldn't call that person a geshe. So therefore, that shows it's not just the basis of imputation, but also what you need as a conceptual consciousness that designates someone to be a geshe.
Dila duzane dila and the Tashi Semasine Minji Dache, Kanje, Kandakan Daba in a Daze Samarigo, Mariko, Dasashi, the Kiju, Nijinji Gores. That means in Dasa in or Tashi Denke de Vachimato, Sujunjung the Midas and Michago Maris. Then that Tashi Denke was Nijinji, but Tashi Semasine Tanija. That Tashi Semadan and Tokola Denita, Misola and Jubares, Gijiri.
So here I'm saying the way I expressed it, I said a basis of imputation pramana, or a basis of imputation valid cognizer. But this doesn't literally mean here valid cognizer in the sense of a consciousness. It just means kind of like that which qualifies as a basis of imputation. So that which is like pramana in the sense of that which is non-truth, that which is in accordance with reality with regard to the basis of imputation. So having a qualified, having a proper basis of imputation. You need both. You need a proper basis of imputation, plus you need an imputing consciousness.
Dine niba di karesena, niba sigura di wa di karesena, dire tanda gyabji chirimachigi, ani kongro shunbi kabi kiki, ani serachigi, ani chirimachigi, pera. 아니 지금이 생각을 다 생각 때문에 가지고 지금이 고랑기 아니 숨고도스 아니 다시 세마스에디 아니 다니디 제수는 중요 말이스 다시 세마스에 다니디 마세 다시 세마샤바이나 아니 랑규처럼 두고레스 세야다 아니 디나 신지기 아니 그게 뒤지 캠부스 다 토마르 민당이디 아니 가시고래 단단 야가시에디 디리 치디랑 자샤바에디 디리다 아니 야가시에디 베베기 lumba카시라 아니 한국 담에기 다바들 야가라 그랬어 아니 lumba카시라 아니 길로자에들 야가시고 그랬어 진짜 수시 강다바 다가라 레마도 더 힘을 땡케지 매바다지 어떤데기 숨긴 지고다 어디 딜레한테스 따다 고투는 뭐도나 디 신주로 세시로 디체데 디르
So, in the way that there's a kind of explanation in Vishala's text, the explanation, this is based on a tutor of Kashmir Rinpoche when he was small. So it was a tree Rinpoche.
단다 분상기 그렇지. 근데 지금 단다 여러 고랑기 용지 간데 지고.
So Kashmir Rinpoche's tutor was a tree
Rinpoche.
Rinpoche 샤샤르르시기 용세지.
말해. 간데 지고 단다 리존을 무시해봐. 리존을 무시기 다 공로 충중까지 세르지기 간데 지고 지어. 어디? 링무시 말해.
Anyway, so so that was his name. He was a tree Rinpoche who still existed in Tibet, so Kandinti Rinpoche. According to his explanation, it is not correct to posit this basis of interpretation pramana. So saying this is not correct to say this basis of interpretation pramana. Why? Because he's saying if we accept that, if we accept there is this valid interpretation or valid basis of interpretation, here the word pramana being used as kind of valid. If a phenomenon for its existence depends on the basis of interpretation, like a valid basis of interpretation, then we would fall into the view of the Svatantrika school. Why do we fall into the view of the Svatantrika school? The explanation is given here that the basis of interpretation is really not that important. The example Teacher uses is you can have different bases of interpretation, but you use the same word for a different object. So here the word in this object, the word is nyaga, the Tibetan word nyaga. So sometimes nyaga can mean shoestring, shoe strap. So a shoe strap can in some places in Tibet, in some areas of Tibet, a shoelace or a shoe strap is called nyaga. In other places of Tibet, it means a scale, a weighing scale. So therefore, here you have different bases of interpretation, but you can call it nyaga in both cases. So therefore, his argument is that the basis of interpretation is not that important. It's more important to have a conceptual consciousness that designates a context. So here, therefore, this master, Kandinti Rinpoche, he said that, therefore, of those two, a conceptual consciousness and a valid basis of interpretation or a basis of interpretation pramana, the latter is not very important.
지산다 디 시송치니 단다디 남로래 다티 다기 삼수디라 딘지 샤바이나 아니 초진에 다시 세마세기 타니디 슝치모도 주나는 민두스 그가 개슝제 지에서 슝제 아니 지네 아니 딘지기 니초도 되는 유버기 지시에디 런주베기 시도로 와스 어디 다 되기 납차에디레 아니 디와디라 다 가산다바나신 디나도 토요르다 미라야르데 다 가산 주단 디라바나신 다절 주제세야디다 주제세 니디 또베타고 지거레 제나미니버 지거레 이네 지 주제 지 주마레시 요와디 간지 지기레세나 고버르세다 나린 치문이게 나로라 타니 위치마신 게 뇌만의 그 최소 다시 민다래 찍디 주기 다시래 찍디 주기 다시 말했으니 이와도 책임이다 제산 딜레도 전에 아니 다다 권한기 순간의 신체나 다시 쳐버려를 나오라 찍디 주기 다시 말해 찍디 주기 다시래스 딜라바이나 다시기 톤이 쳐버쳐래스 다시기 톤이 쳐버쳐나 다시 문에 이어가 차도래스 쳐버려 아니 랑문에 이어가 차도도 무슨 딜다
So, so that's what Geshe was saying that based on that, so from one perspective, this Dhammachi Rinpoche, as is also mentioned, it is not okay to talk about the basis of invitation pramana, because this is, so one reason was already given, another reason is that according to the scriptures of Lama Tsongkhapa and the spiritual sons, Gyaltsabje and Khedrubje, as well as the Indian treatises, there's no mention of such a basis of invitation pramana. So again, we don't need to use this kind of word because it's not in there. So that is one reason, so since it's not really found in the scriptures, therefore it's not correct. And the other reason as was given, because if we say something exists for something for its existence depends on those two, imputation and the basis of imputation, that is what the Svatantrika says. The Madhyamaka Svatantrika followers, or the followers of the Madhyamaka Svatantrika say that a phenomenon exists because of the basis of imputation, due to the basis of imputation, and independence on imputation. So when we fall into the extreme of, when we fall into the view of the Svatantrika. So also below this, Geshe gives an example of a person, which is a person who is confused with a heap of stones. So it's like a heap of stones is perceived to be an actual person. This is similar. You can take another example. Here, the snake and the rope. Shigina says, if we just explain it on the basis of the snake and the rope, so there's a rope that I wrongly perceived as a snake. So here, there's the difference, of course, between an actual snake, where I have an actual snake aggregate, where I have actual snake aggregate and I impute the snake, or I have a rope and I impute snake, I wrongly perceive, I wrongly impute snake. What is the difference? So according to the elimination of the thought and the London symbol, both these texts, which are by Lama Tsongkhapa, the explanation that is given is, well, there's a difference from the point of view of valid cognition. From the point of view of the snake, the rope snake, there is no valid cognition. From the point of view of the snake, there is. So there's no real explanation from the basis of, from the point of view of the basis of imputation. So that there's not given that differentiation, because that would be similar to the Svatantrika that says that from the side of the basis of imputation, the object exists. So in order for the person not to fall into that system, the explanation that is given here is by way of the difference of valid cognition.
That teaches and did the sheet on a kiwache may in some any the Yakimos in Tomar Ming Dangi and Ming Karitale, the Red Resta, and Tomar Ming Dangi, the Kawal Pumbatana, and Kawal Pumares.
So if it has nothing to do with the basis of imputation, if that was the argument, well, the problem is that the person who first uses the word, who first imputes a certain word, so Dogit Gimpo in Tibetan means someone who, like a neologist, or someone who gives a new name to something, who applies a new term. So then a person who applies a new term could just call a pillar a vase. So anything would be possible.
Ane pesha suyo rwa, pesha suyo di gomu chulori yin rimunchi di che che, an di gomu chulori yin, di gomu kyalori yin sin da pake di che, an di pesha di rinda yore da, yore pake chilor choni nyupche daya yore, chasan yore. Da di che la, da di pake shugu dagarang la da pe shungi, da di takbi wangi ku rindang jin cha rwa. Da pe shor chani, rangwa shor chani, ane pake Jamarbo Leche, that round trossality, as you yomarity, that she would in that yomarta. That do you take me the Mares in Taja, the Yama in Bachata. She peshed Ranjarwata, she would Ranjari, remove Ranjari. That cheddar Mares in Tasa Vichella and a Pejikin yomarta, she would run. Did she design and the J can make it Carita unit, Takara Chatu those.
On the other hand, if you think about, for example, another example, when Tibet was free, and they had their own money, they had their own currency that they used. So they had pieces of paper that were 10, I don't know what was the currency, 10 yen or 100 yen, whatever was the name of the currency. So those were pieces of paper which had a certain writing on them, certain numbers on them. So those pieces of paper, the Tibetan Mint at the time, the Tibetan government had ascribed to them a certain value, and then people could use the money according to that value. They could go shopping, they would receive things from that. It was seen as having a particular use, so it was used in such a way according to the value that was given by the Tibetan government at the time. But then when the communist Chinese arrived, when they took power and they overtook Tibet, when they took over, they decided the Tibetan money had no value. They devalued the Tibetan money. So from that time onwards, it had no value whatsoever. So the money itself hadn't changed. The piece of paper hadn't changed. The quality of the paper hadn't changed. The writing, the numbers had not changed. But it was of no more use. It had no longer any value. So here it actually shows that the person who gives value, who designates, who imputes, can actually decide, I'm going to impute this, I'm going to designate it such and such.
The dinner shinji pege Silena Sinzin da Duzo Shortage Tov, Annie Peggy Question is Sinzin Redore. Young Peggy Sadrodi, Midi Ranjadi, and Silence in my English Chadore. Annie Koi, Dizuma Sane, Yan, Chuloji Teon, Yan, my English Chaduda. Tileduta, Caritata Redos. Do you can be Laburada?
So likewise, if you take the example of a president or prime minister of a country, well, when their term is over, when their term as president or their term as prime minister is over, they're still the same person. They haven't really changed, really have not become a Christian person. But now you no longer call them president or prime minister. Or in the case of political upheaval, if they're being stripped of their title as president or prime minister, they have not really changed. But nonetheless, you no longer call them that. So there is, in a way, a kind of power, if you like, or something really comes from the person who imputes. It's kind of up to them to impute or not, whoever has that power to do so.
Yang Su Chungjung la Dana Yang Tie Maringi. Regimindo. Shenda Kari Dasho, Sanji Sin Dasho, Dictor, Sanji Chagmindo.
So even if for example, you call an ordinary person Buddha, in Tibetan the word Sangye. Sangye is the name of the person. Sangye means Buddha. So there are some Tibetans, just ordinary people who call Sangye or Buddha, but that doesn't make them Buddha.
Di Nashin Joina, Tashi Kitchen Mevache, and Ying Mayindi, Takin Delay, Takin Sema Yimi, Choyos, Sutadan Majini, Konawanja Yumiji Dana, and it taking it. Pagichawa Cheting it, did it Charudo.
So looking at some of these examples here, it's a bit like it's not, the basis of invitation is not so important. What is more important is the person who imputes, who designates, depending on their power, depending on their influence. It is their power or influence that can decide whether something is that or another. So looking at some of these examples, it seems to be actually more that power.
The dinner, Tio Mare, did you give me Chichiore? Once Losella Kunsing, Nimanga, Nimati, the Kunsing and girl. She said that the Kunsing di Kiku in a Kimbo in a Onja Unity, that the Lord Losser Nimati in that and Nimatin Chatter, Nimanga in that and Nimanga Chatter. That Kiku and Kimbo Lamen and Onzuki in that and Chagunda, they were joking.
So another example, this is not in here, but another situation here that Geshe-la has used that as an example, but in the monasteries, in the Tibetan monasteries, when they celebrate Losar, it's usually between 5 to 7 days of vacation. They have a holiday 5 or 7 days. But that vacation, so the length of time is decided by whoever is in power, who's in control. So whether it's the abbot or the disciplinarian, they decide whether it's 5 days or 7 days. So we don't have that kind of power to do so, as showed the previous example where we were caught playing. We have no kind of influence over that because it's those people in power who decide.
Yang Pagi 단다 깊이 간데 치르무치 아니 막 김부 자상기 김부 사바는데 무치 테스 담보여로 침다 되죠. 남진 뒤다지 여르데 다 무치 김부나 일로 담보들 다 로서 니마스마도 베스 공생 되죠. 다 공생 니마스미 있으다 니마 시베터라 아니 개배만 계신 시시도 개야 테스 구양부도 잡아드실 테스 잠만나에다 되지리 다 경기 가리고이나 다 니마스미 용다시 니마 시제셨어. 아니 개파라 기린 벌 치러를 때 아니 시제 아니 이것이 차를 이거만 지세요 어제 비슷하다야 이것이 요 차고
So when Kepsi-Ganin Chirumushi, the Kasan-Ganin Chirumushi was the abbot, a long time ago was the abbot of Japunos in the monastery. Kepsi-Ganin Chirumushi, he was very strict, he was very strict in general, so he was quite strict with the discipline, and at that time he was also quite strict. So when he was the abbot, he decided that Losa will only be for 3 days. So at that time, there was Gyemi Tama Gyamtsen, a great master, the late Bishop Tama Gyamtsen. So when he was there, he was also quite influential and powerful. He had decided 3 days is not enough. So therefore, on the 4th day, he put the queen board outside for the monks to play, and he just decided, okay, so there's a 4th day of vacation. So it was his influence, his power. He was able to put the kind of toy basically outside and decided there's a 4th day. So he was able to do so.
다 디지도 전에 아니 디나신다기 다냐가 다디라에 디체 어디나신 답변 대다치를 lumba수수를 미미라와 다샤 같은 용대기도 어디지도 전에 아니 딘지 레디 이내 가게 디 가스부리 뭐부터든지 통도 파다비 왕기 인차바마 힘버체 쿠란문에 좀 맞디다 디인다스를 카자기 유서르버치 아니 철수지 용대기도
So likewise, so here when you take the example of nyaga, can have different meanings. It can mean shoelace, it can mean a scale. Likewise, you can have one phenomenon, one object with different names. So previously you had one name, but it has different meanings according to different places. You can also have one phenomenon which has different words. Different people use different words. So whichever it is, the phenomena are merely imputed. They're merely imputed, just designated, but it nonetheless seems as if on the side of the object, it seems as if the object were to proclaim that it is such and such, and that it does not depend on imputation by a conceptual consciousness. So this is the object of negation to be identified.
예, 되게 이마 김발된 잡아라기 디치송이요. 또베 딱섬도 주바다. 또베 딱섬기 주바스니 지도 페이지 되게 담보디 또베 딱섬도 주비 기제디체 제마도저 또베 딱섬기스 주비 기제디 인사르비제. 담보디 또바리를 고마를 내줘라. 또베 딱을 점도 주바리마도 또베 딱섬기스 주바. 또베 딱이 왕기에는 유바 차줘야 기제디 요마로와.
So this view, Bishop Anandra has a way, Bishop Anandra from Japan listening, so he has a way of describing, there's this phrase like being merely imputed by conceptual consciousness, which just means being merely imputed by conceptual consciousness, or by way of being merely imputed by conceptual consciousness. So there's 2 ways of explaining it. So as being merely imputed by conceptual consciousness seems to express the view that was indicated earlier, that although all phenomena are merely imputed, you do not need a conceptual consciousness. So these two ways of phrasing it, something exists as being merely imputed by a conceptual consciousness, implies that you don't need a conceptual consciousness. Whereas if you say phenomena exist by way of independent on a conceptual consciousness, in that case you would have to, this wouldn't work, so it has a different kind of meaning.
Dila duta dila kisi ta kirgyeso roboda muiso roboda kashi da sebudo to mingdi ta ani shine ko cha joyeji ine chue tamje da dindi chartogu res dindi chartogu yuna ana pena maasiyedi ngele tuje kimbuchi ani maasta ani shine ma cha jore laburo dindi rigmido ani ma thomame bani yuye khare maoni bilode thomame bani kigido was ta dindi laba ina
So, with regard to some phenomena, it is easier to understand that without a person imputing, without a conceptual consciousness designating, the object couldn't exist. So, for example, the disciplinarian was merely appointed as being a disciplinarian. Likewise, money, when you produce money and you give it a value, there it's pretty obvious that you need a person who imputes, you need a person who designates that phenomenon. Without that, it wouldn't be possible. But what about the self? Do you need for the self someone to tell you, okay, from now on you can call this the self, and so then you start doing it? So actually, it's not true for all phenomena, is it? Because actually, with regard to the self, since beginning this time, we've been thinking I. So therefore, this is not the case. It's not as obvious as with regard to all phenomena.
Dile düzene, dile yanchu lenchi terce, diye kyawamata ngasiegi, dadi chariwa inzam, antigi ni bachagi wangi ngawni milo jigo res, ngatusuti dahara res.
So then again, another answer I gave here in response to that, well, so why do we naturally have a sense of I? Where does that come from, that we can naturally do that without someone from the outside telling us such? And Geshe-la is saying, well, the reason for that is that since beginning this time, or since from the previous life, we have these imprints. So we have these imprints, and so therefore innately or naturally, we think I. It's due to those imprints.
Yana menani ta lenja da shindaji kyamche, ani michik daharang la karsi gure ta ngachik daharang la karsi gure bebeke la bege shingi bache ine komchi shira meze ngi ta chige chigi inji chigi ta ba ina ani ai le di kurang mun tu bacha ine nga la di dile bebe nga la gu yarta dire ma to ma seji chargi me das ta bebeki ta yondu ani ma seji chawachi la ai la wa ina kunje ai la gu yare ma to ai re tindi leg me do chesa o tires ta.
So another point here which Genlai says gives here in kind of response or as like going from the other debate. So in English you say I, in Tibetan you say nga. So it's the same, has the same meaning but refers to something but different words used. So if there's a Tibetan who's very used to using English, so that Tibetan, when they say I, there's really a sense, there's this intrinsic I, there's really an I. Whereas if they use the word nga, the Tibetan word nga, then that is not there because nga doesn't mean some self or it doesn't seem to refer to a self. Whereas the other way around, a Tibetan is very used to using Tibetan, then they would think of oneself, one thinks of oneself, one thinks of nga, and not as I. So those people over there, that's kind of I, but I, for me it's nga. So they have an innate sense that self refers to nga.
Ta dijena ai se di ani chi ta be on ktu ma se di be ta be on ktu ta tinde la uke gres ta ine tinde la ba ina ta chi gi ju la ma o ni mi lo me la o chi ro ta ai o ni mi lo ba do ma o ni mi lo me la ba na ta tes mi ta sa wo ya shu mo bu chi da ke dre da ta ni mo bu chi da ke dre ju ngu re chi san ta che ba che re se ji.
So when saying that, so therefore I is a kind of implication that comes from Westerners or from people who speak English, and then Nga is coming from Tibetan. So but if you say that, therefore Westerners do not have a mind that thinks now, I, because they use a different word, now that's problematic. So in order to have self-grasping, if you have to say, Nga, so then the students don't have a self-grasping. And so we need to discuss that another time.
Let's leave it at that tomorrow.
Tomorrow we have a day off, and then we will convene again. We get together again on Monday.